Welcome to Judge for Yourself. You all know that this particular program promotes the Constitution and, more importantly, the values of the Constitution. And those values are freedom, dignity, and equality for all. Oh, you may think, is that so? No, it isn't. Why? Because in South Africa today, we have a whole lot of people who believe there should be dignity, equality, and freedom, but just for South Africans. Not for those who are not South African nationals, not for those who weren't born in South Africa, not for those who've desperately come to South Africa because their countries are in an even more precarious situation.
The people, they just asked away, they didn't ask us that we have a documents of not, just asked away. So like a dog.
We don't have anything, but it's better to go home without anything than to lose our life.
And so we've got a whole range of political parties. We can start with the great friend of this particular program who's not prepared to come on, Gayton McKenzie, who's run a fairly exhaustive xenophobic program for quite some time. Of course, coming close behind him is Herman Mashaba, who has exactly the same xenophobic set of outlets. And then, of course, we've got MK. We'll get back to them in a moment. Significantly, one of the political parties that's often accused of being populist, which is the EFF, have behaved extremely commendably in this regard, for they understand something, it seems to me, as we all should, which is this. This country was once in a situation where many, many South Africans had to leave South Africa, and they were sheltered in countries such as Zimbabwe and Zambia. They protected them. They assisted us heroically and consistently insofar as the liberation of South Africa from apartheid was concerned.
A Nigerian street trader and a South African worker are not enemies. A Somali shopkeeper and a township resident are not enemies. The true enemy is the system that keeps African people poor while a tiny elite accumulates wealth.
And what was their reward? Their reward was those who believe now that unless you are a South African citizen, you need to be chased out of this country. And more than that, by the way, your whole life is a danger, or your livelihood, as the case may be.
There's no indication that there is in any community a real sort of presence there. So what it tells us is that this is a fairly orchestrated, very conscious kind of move that has a lot of political overtones that go way beyond an anti-migrant or xenophobic kind of politics, but that involve much more than that.
We've got Operation Zula, who has been there for quite some time, and I might add, who have been subject to a whole series of court cases, in which in one particular case, of course, they were the receiving end of a decision of the South Gauteng High Court granting an injunction against them, prohibiting their supporters from blocking migrants' access to healthcare facilities. What kind of society we're in when people who are sick are prevented from getting healthcare?
Look, it's not to say that there are not real problems with our immigration system. We have recognized this. It's not to say that there's not necessarily a need for some policy reform. But migrants and targeting migrants, it's easy. The people in South Africa that are doing this have clearly learned their lessons from Donald Trump and the far right in Europe.
One has to really hang one's head in shame when one reads that there had to be a court order to allow that to occur. And so what I'm really driving at here is that these particular groups are opportunistic in the extreme. Take, for example, the recent sort of perhaps fly-by-night, I can only hope fly-by-night group, which started in March 2025, called March and March. Apparently its leader is Jacinta Ngobeze Zuma, who herself is not adverse to all forms of controversy.
So what we're dealing with here is a government that is itching for violence. I think for them it's an opportunity to test their powers, because if they wanted to deal with crime and deal with violence and deal with all the problems that we have in the country, all that excitement that they have, they could have used it right now. We're dealing with a lot of crimes and criminals and organized crimes, but I've never seen them so excited to unleash the military.
But she doesn't interest me as much as the group does. What's their agenda, one might ask? And to what extent can one really draw a reasonable inference that suddenly this group, which has just emerged and is so voluble about this great threat of foreign people in South Africa suddenly emerging in the way that they have? Is it because of the local government elections, which will take us in a few months' time? Is this a case of a group which has essentially read from the script of Donald Trump and has taken the idea that populism, born of the fact of an economy that isn't working and so many people in a precarious position, that it's easiest to blame those who are the most precarious and who are the most vulnerable, and in a sense threaten them with death and destruction of their livelihoods? Is this a cynical attempt to essentially gain control, at the very least, of the KwaZulu-Natal local governments right across that province? One is certainly entitled to ask those questions, and we need answers to them.
It's very worrying to see, in some cases, it's certainly not all the media, but in some cases, pouring fuel onto this fire. It's a very dangerous game that some of the media is playing, because you might get a lot of clicks on your social media, you might get a lot of people watching your shows, but you're not contributing to what the real underlying purpose of the media is to inform people factually and without bias.
Because at the end of the day, the reality is that groups like this are a cancer in our society if we are to call ourselves a constitutional society. Why? Because you have to treat everybody with dignity and respect.
About much too much things that we've been facing. I work in the saloon. They came to our saloon to arrest us. They've been beating us. They're not doing much in peace. These people, they are coming to attack, not for them to do their march in peace.
I keep on coming back to the way in which other African countries so heroically and so consistently supported our particular struggle. In fact, one of the great ironies about all of this is when you think that Zimbabwe is such a vulnerable and precarious society. Well, it might not have been when 20-odd years ago, Mugabe lost an election that everybody knew he'd lost, where the people suddenly came along and said, we're going to exercise our democratic rights to effectively restore democracy to our country. And what did the South African government under then Thabo Mbeki do? Well, it just obsequiously supported the Mugabe regime.
We mourn with you the passing of our friend, statesman, leader, and revolutionary. In everything else that President Mugabe sought to do in that country, it was all in the interest of the people of Zimbabwe, contributing to and wanted to make sure that there is a better Zimbabwe.
Aren't we also culpable for the fact that that country has consistently degraded itself so that it forces so many of its citizens to come over to South Africa in desperation so at least they can eke out a precarious existence?
It's actually a broader African challenge. It's a broader African challenge. You look at the African Union, the fact that you have challenges in Sudan, challenges in Mali, challenges in Libya, challenges in South Africa, challenges between Rwanda and DRC, it says that there's a bigger migration issue in the continent. And that bigger issue has to be dealt with at a continental level. And that's the second part. But actually, the real story is every government must deliver on their promises to their citizens, and their citizens will not be compelled to leave their countries.
I wonder if I could just turn for a moment to a personal observation. I have taught at many universities, but particularly my alma mater, the University of Cape Town, for almost 50 years, believe it or not. And during that time, I have taught many African students from all over the continent. And what I know about them is so many of them are incredibly smart, wonderful human beings who can and often have made a serious and significant contribution to the welfare and the economy of South Africa. How is one supposed to look those people in the face and say, sorry, no, you are not even human in this country because you can't get healthcare, you shouldn't be able to get any other facilities, and get out of here as quickly as you can. And if you don't, well, then your life is in jeopardy. I find this an appalling thought, and that's where we are. And so the real question is, what should be done? Well, let's start with the government.
When it is well managed and regulated, migration can help to drive economic growth and opportunity for all.
I accept that the government mouths off a whole lot of platitudes about the fact that, well, we don't like xenophobic violence. And commendably and correctly they say, and it's true, of course people are entitled to protest. That's part of a constitutional democracy, but not to kill people, not to threaten them. And the government needs to do more than just mouth those protestations. It needs to ensure that, in fact, law is kept in this country. And that means ensuring, protecting all in South Africa from these vicious attacks, which are clearly criminal in nature. But it does mean more too. It means that our shameful neglect of the economy, the fact that people live in such a precarious way, creates the very conditions for populists to exploit those vulnerable, to say, well, the reason for that is because all these foreigners are taking our job. An obvious rubbish populist statement which has very little justification, say, for this. It allows xenophobia to breed, to continue, and it strengthens groups like March and Operation Dulula. And so the real point is we need to stop this. We need to ensure that people can live in this country with some measure of confidence that their lives won't be threatened and their livelihoods destroyed. Yes, we also need proper refugee laws and we need certain better border controls. But we've got to at least capture a spirit that we once had. We're part of Africa. We're all Africans. And we should look after each other as best we can, just as they looked after us in our hour of need. So what is to be done? What is to be done is that the government's got to do something about it, but the discourse has to change. We have to improve the economy. We need to ensure better border regulation. And we need to ensure that groups like March and Operation Dulu do not cynically exploit a serious problem at the moment for their own political advantages in the November elections. That's where we are. How is this to be done? You'll have to judge for yourself. Goodbye.